The water is black and flat at 034 local time, and a string of shapes bobs just below the surface across the shipping lane. Horned contact mines, old design, simple, brutally effective, each one tethered to a sinker on the seabed, each one rising just far enough to kiss the hull of a supertanker. An IRGC fast boat is already 30 knots into its escape run, white wake cutting south toward the Iranian coast. The skipper just seeded a minefield across the Strait of Hormuz. 21 miles wide at its narrowest point, $100 million of oil moving through it every hour, and now a chain of steel spheres is sitting in the middle of the lane like a loaded tripwire. 18 minutes later, the U.S. Navy began clearing it. Here is how that happened, and why the IRG skipper never made it home clean. Here is what most people get wrong about the Strait of Hormuz. They picture a wide-open ocean highway with room to maneuver. The reality is a traffic corridor so tight that tankers follow designated inbound and outbound lanes barely 2 miles wide each, separated by a median zone. Drop a minefield in either lane and you have not just blocked a ship, you have shut down a fifth of the world's daily oil supply. That is not a naval problem. That is a global economic emergency. Every hour those lanes stay closed, prices move in Tokyo, Frankfurt, and Houston. The IRGS understands this arithmetic exactly. What happened in the pre-dawn hours over the Gulf is a scenario U.S. Navy planners have war-gamed for 40 years. The IRGS mine doctrine is not new. Iran has been accumulating naval mines since the 1980s tanker war, when IRG operatives seeded the Gulf and caught the USS Samuel B. Roberts, a frigate, dead in the water, with the hull blown open. That single mine nearly sank a warship and tied up a naval task force for weeks. The lesson the IRG drew was simple. A mine that costs a few $1,000s can neutralize a vessel worth $500 million. The lesson the U.S. Navy drew was equally simple. Never let it happen twice without an answer. What is worth understanding about those mines specifically, the horned contact design, is how deceptively old-fashioned they look against modern naval warfare. Steel spheres roughly the size of a beach ball, studded with 6 to 8 lead-tip protrusions called Hertz horns. When a ship's hull makes contact with a horn, it crushes a glass vial of electrolyte inside, completes an electrical circuit, and detonates the main charge, anywhere from 200 to 400 pounds of TNT equivalent, depending on the variant. The physics of an underwater explosion against a steel hull are unforgiving. The blast creates a shockwave that travels through water at roughly 5 times the speed of sound in air, and that shockwave hits the hull before the gas bubble even fully expands. The secondary effect, the bubble collapse, can literally break a ship's keel. A Samuel B. Roberts-class frigate survives that barely, with a crew of exceptional damage control sailors. A commercial supertanker carrying 2 million barrels of crude does not have a damage control team. It has a fire hose and a radio. USS Carver, an Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyer, is running the Northern Transit Corridor at 20 knots when the mine contact report comes through. The ship's AN/QQ-89 sonar suite is already passively scanning. The watch officer picks up anomalous bottom contacts, hard returns with the acoustic signature of moored mines. The precise count is uncertain in the first seconds. That uncertainty is itself a threat. Do not drive a 9,000-ton warship through a minefield you have not mapped. Carver comes to all stop. What nobody anticipated in the initial minute was the depth variation. The IRGC team had laid 2 rows, one in the inbound lane, one staggered along the edge of the median zone, using a tidal offset that put some mines 6 feet below the surface and others barely 2. A tanker riding high in ballast might clip a deep mine. A tanker loaded low would hit the shallow ones first. The field was not random. It was engineered for the full range of traffic. That complication cost the first responders roughly 4 minutes of reassessment before the clearance plan locked in. On the bridge of Carver, the Commodore makes 3 calls in under 90 seconds. First, alert the SH-60 Seahawk crew already sitting on deck for a pre-dawn ASW patrol, new mission, mine reconnaissance, towed sonar, map the field immediately. Second, flash traffic to 5th Fleet headquarters in Bahrain, straight mining in progress, assets being committed. Third, weapons-free authorization request for the MQ-9 Reaper that has been orbiting the strait at altitude since midnight. The Reaper's electro-optical turret has been tracking the IRGC fast boat since it departed the drop zone. The skipper does not know this yet. Put yourself in that IRGC skipper's seat for a second. You just seeded a minefield that could shut the strait for days. Your fast boat is 30 knots and pulling away. The coast is 15 miles out. In your mind, you are already home. What you do not know is that 6 miles above you, a General Atomics MQ-9 Reaper, armed, persistent, and completely silent, has had your boat on its sensor ball for 11 minutes. The Reaper's link to Carver and to 5th Fleet is live. Every heading change you make is being logged, every knot of speed. The grid coordinates of your launch site are already queued. What the skipper does know, what every IRGC fast boat crew operating in the strait knows, is that the Americans have persistent ISR overhead. That knowledge is baked into the doctrine. The IRG's acceptance of that risk is not ignorance, it is calculation. Their operational thinking holds that persistent surveillance does not equal instant response. that political and legal authorization chains introduce delay, and that delay is survivable distance. On most nights, that calculation has been roughly correct. On this morning, it is not, because the authorization chain for exactly this scenario, active minilaying in the transit lanes, had been pre-coordinated between 5th Fleet, CENTCOM, and the Joint Chiefs down to specific trigger conditions. The mine contact report met those conditions automatically. There was no phone call to Washington. There was no wait for a lawyer. The weapons-free request was a formality that took 40 seconds to answer. The SH-60 Seahawk lifts off Carver's fantail at T+6 minutes. The crew lowers the ANCQS-22 airborne low-frequency sonar, a towed sensor the size of a torpedo body, into the water 60 feet below the helicopter's hover. The sonar begins painting the bottom. Returns come back fast. 14 confirmed mine contacts in the inbound lane. 4 more probables along the median edge. The SH-60 pilot feeds coordinates directly to Carver's combat management system. The field geometry takes shape on the plot. 2 staggered rows, roughly half a mile of contaminated lane, center weighted toward the deepest draft traffic. Here's what strikes me about the geometry of that field. The placement required precise local knowledge, tidal charts, traffic lane coordinates, the depth profiles at this specific point of the strait. This was not a rushed improvisation. The IRGC team had pre-planned the drop points. Someone had done the hydrographic homework, which raises the question 5th Fleet was already asking before the S-60 had finished its first pass. Was this a solo boat or the opening move of something larger? The answer came from the Reaper feed. Only 1 boat had been in the drop zone. But the launch site on the Iranian coast, a concrete ramp facility south of Bandar Abbas, had 2 more fast boats still on the ramps, engines running. Those 2 boats changed the entire clearance plan. A mine hunting operation requires slow, deliberate work. An SH-60 hovers at low speed, the sonar maps contacts, a dedicated mine countermeasure team, either a surface craft or a diver team, then moves in to neutralize each device. Done correctly, that process takes hours. Done under threat of a second mining run from 2 more boats on an active launch. Ramp, it becomes a race. The IRGC skipper had a choice the instant he saw the Reaper's shadow cross his wake. Scatter the mines and run before the field was complete, or hold and arm the full pattern. He chose to complete the drop. Both roads from that moment led to the same place. The read that will get pushback is this. The IRGC's mine strategy was tactically competent and strategically suicidal, and they knew it going in. The goal was never to permanently close the strait. It was to impose a cost. 1 disrupted shipping day, 1 tanker diverted, 1 insurance rate spike. 1 news cycle of U.S. Navy scrambles in Hormuz. The mine was the message, not the weapon. The problem is the U.S. Navy reads that message the same way every time. You touch the lane, you lose the boat and the ramp. What do you think? When the IRGC skipper saw that Reaper shadow, should he have aborted the drop and scattered, or was completing the field already the only move he had? Drop your answer in the comments. We read everyone. Before we get to the strike on the ramps, there is a piece of this operation that never makes the top line of any news report, and it deserves a moment. At roughly T+8 minutes, while the SH-60 was completing its first sonar pass and the EOD team was suiting up on Carver's stern, a parallel thread was opening in the intelligence architecture. The Reaper's sensor ball had captured continuous imagery of the mining operation from the moment the fast boat left the Iranian coast. That footage, time-stamped, geolocated, already being pushed back through the intelligence chain, was being reviewed by analysts at 5th Fleet and at a forward-deployed signals intelligence cell whose location is not publicly acknowledged. Their job in the next 20 minutes was not the immediate tactical picture. Their job was pattern matching, comparing the boat, the crew visible on the thermal feed, the ramp facility, and the mine deployment technique against a database built from years of IRGC maritime surveillance. They were trying to answer a specific question. Was the crew that just seeded this field the same crew involved in previous incidents? The Limpet mine attacks on commercial tankers in 2019, the harassment operations in 2020 and 2021, or was this a newer, less experienced cell operating under a more aggressive order set? The answer would shape how the intelligence community characterized the operation in the hours and days that followed. It would also determine whether there were further targets beyond the boat and the ramp. The preliminary assessment, reached before the A-10s rolled in, was this. The boat and crew were consistent with a known IRGC naval element out of Bandar Abbas, one linked to at least 2 prior surveillance operations in the strait. Not the same crew that had placed Limpet mines in 2019. That cell had been assessed as disrupted, but operating from the same command structure, the same facility, and almost certainly under orders from the same senior IRGC naval commander, whose name appears in several years of intelligence reporting. That assessment went up the chain. It informed the targeting decision for the coastal facility. The concrete ramp south of Bandar Abbas was not just a boat launch. It was infrastructure tied to a documented pattern of operations. At T+11 minutes, 5th Fleet authorizes weapons free on the coastal launch facility. A pair of A-10 Warthogs, already airborne on a close air support alert out of an undisclosed regional base, receives the tasking and begins its run in. The A-10 is an ugly aircraft by any aesthetic measure. Straight wings, twin turbofan engines mounted high on the rear fuselage, a titanium bathtub around the cockpit, and under the nose, a GAU-8 Avenger rotary cannon, 30mm, 7 barrels, firing depleted uranium rounds at 4,000 rounds per minute. It was designed to destroy Soviet tanks on the North German plain. Here, it is being pointed at concrete boat ramps and fast boats with running engines. The lead A-10 rolls in from the northwest at 4,000 feet, descending to the attack run. The pilot pickles 2 AGM-65 Maverick missiles first. Infrared guided, seeker heads locking on the heat signatures of the idling boat engines on the ramp. First Maverick tracks left, detonates on the concrete hardstand. Second Maverick guides right, direct hit on the forward hull of the first fast boat. The boat disintegrates. The second A-10 holds high cover, watching for any air defense reaction from the Iranian coast. There is none. The IRGC garrison at the site had not anticipated an air attack this fast. The Reaper's track on the mining boat had given U.S. planners a precise 11-minute head start on target development. By the time the IRGC could have scrambled any response from Bandar Abbas, surface-to-air missiles, interceptors, additional boats, the ramps were already burning. Then came the GAU-8. The lead A-10 pulls off the Maverick Pass, comes around in a wide left-hand turn, and rolls in again at lower altitude. The cannon fires a 2-second burst, roughly 130 rounds of depleted uranium punching through the second fast boat's hull, the fuel tanks, and the dock structure behind it. The sound a GAU-8 makes an attack is not a bang or a crack. It is a sound like an enormous canvas being torn in half, lasting exactly as long as the pilot holds the trigger. Then the fuel tanks go. Secondary explosion. Black smoke column visible from Carver's Bridge, 15 miles offshore. The entire strike sequence, from first Maverick release to GAU-8 pull-off, takes 4 minutes and 20 seconds. At the ramp facility, in the minutes immediately after the strike, the picture resolved through the Reaper's sensor ball with a clarity that is both tactically useful and, in a quieter register, deeply sobering. The second fast boat was gone. The dock structure was burning. Personnel who had been visible on the thermal feed before the strike, ground crew, what appeared to be 2 or 3 individuals near the second boat's stern, were no longer visible as upright signatures. The Reaper's infrared camera does not annotate what it sees. It simply records heat. The analyst watching the feed noted the change in thermal signatures and logged it without commentary. That log entry would eventually become part of a battle damage assessment that no journalist would see for months, if ever. This is the part of a precision strike operation that the strike footage never quite captures. The gap between what the camera sees and what the camera means. The A-10s did not miss. The facility was destroyed. And the people who had been standing on that ramp when the Mavericks came off the rail were, by any reasonable assessment, no longer a factor. The crews of those aircraft are professionals. They understand exactly what their weapons do. And in the operational logic of the morning, active mina laying, 2 additional boats ready to run a second sortie, a transit lane with tankers stacking up in the Gulf of Oman, that outcome was the authorized and intended result of a command decision made 16 time zones and 11 minutes away from where it landed. Back in the Strait, the mine clearance operation is still in progress. The SH-60 has now completed 2 full sonar passes. The mine plot is confirmed. 14 moored contact mines in the inbound lane, 4 probables along the median edge. Carver's embarked explosive ordnance disposal team deploys in an inflatable boat at T plus 14 minutes. Their primary tool is the ASLQ-48 mine neutralization system, a remotely operated vehicle, cable-guided, that approaches a moored mine and attaches a shaped explosive charge. The EOD team works from outside the mine pattern, directing the ROV by wire. Here is where the operation hits its first genuine obstacle. The ROV cable, 500 meters of it, designed for relatively calm water, is fighting a 3-knot tidal current running northeast through the inbound lane. In calm water, the ROV tracks precisely to its target. In a 3-knot current, the cable bows, the ROV drifts, and the approach geometry has to be recalculated for each mine individually. The EOD team supervisor calls Carver. Estimated neutralization time is longer than the initial 15-minute plan, more like 35 to 40 minutes for the full field at current conditions. The team working the inflatable boat is 4 people, a team leader, a second operator sharing the ROV controls, and 2 swimmers on standby in full dive gear, dry suits, masks, fins, and each carrying a manual cutting tool in case the ROV fails on a tether line and a mine needs to be neutralized by hand. Hand neutralization is the scenario nobody wants. It means a diver approaches a live contact mine in active tidal current, locates the tether wire in zero visibility water. The Strait at 0400 in the inbound lane, with sediment kicked up by current and recent boat traffic, offers essentially no visibility below about 3 feet, finds the mooring shackle, and cuts the tether. The mine then rises to the surface, where it is either detonated by the second swimmer with a small place charge or flagged for surface recovery. It is painstaking and dangerous, and it is done by people who train for exactly this and hope every time they suit up that the ROV does not malfunction. On this morning, the ROV holds. All 14 confirmed mines in the inbound lane are neutralized by the cable-guided system. The 4 probables along the median edge take longer because probable contacts require the ROV to make a positive ID pass before the charge is placed. 2 of the 4 are confirmed mines. 2 are bottom debris, old anchors, possibly a section of lost fishing gear that produced returns ambiguous enough to require a close look. Each one of those close looks costs 8 to 12 minutes of ROV time against a 3-knot current. The Commodore has a choice. Wait for full clearance before reopening the lane. Safest. But every minute it stays closed, tanker traffic is stacking up in the Gulf of Oman. Insurers are panicking, and the IRGC gets its headline. Or open a single-file emergency corridor along the southern edge of the median zone, outside the confirmed mine pattern, with Carver shepherding traffic through one ship at a time. He chooses the corridor. At T+18 minutes from the initial mine contact, the first emergency transit signal goes out to waiting traffic. The lane is not fully clear, but it is open. And that gap between not fully clear and open anyway under U.S. Navy escort is the operational statement the Commodore is making to everyone watching. Tehran, Riyadh, Beijing, the insurance market. The IRGC mining boat is still running, or was. At T+16 minutes, the MQ-9 Reaper, which has tracked the vessel continuously since before the mines were dropped, receives weapons release authorization. The Reaper is carrying 2 AGM-114 Hellfire missiles under its wings. The engagement is not a long shot. The Reaper has been pacing the fast boat at altitude, well outside any acoustic or visual detection range. The IRGC crew below has no radar warning receiver, no missile approach warning system. There is no klaxon, there is no time. The first Hellfire covers the distance in approximately 7 seconds. Direct hit on the stern, where the outboard engines are mounted. The fast boat comes apart from the rear forward. The second Hellfire hits the bow section, which is still afloat, and removes any ambiguity. The IRGC skipper had navigated 40 years of institutional doctrine and one very bad morning into a convergence of an MQ-9 above, an A-10 behind him, and an EOD team already working the field he had laid. The choice he made when he saw the Reaper's shadow, hold and complete the drop, was not irrational within IRG doctrine. It was the mission. Complete the field, accept the risk, make the message. The message was sent, so was the answer. Most people assume a Hellfire strike on a small boat in international waters requires days of legal review and escalation chains. It does not in this context, not under the rules of engagement covering active interference with freedom of navigation in the Strait of Hormuz. The authorization chain from mine contact to weapons free on the boat was 16 minutes. That speed is not recklessness. It is 40 years of pre-authorized response planning. There is a detail about the Hellfire engagement worth sitting with. The MQ-9 sensor ball had been recording the crew of the fast boat for the better part of 20 minutes by the time the weapons release order came through. On the thermal feed, you can see individuals moving on the deck, adjusting equipment, looking astern, one figure standing near the bow at what appears to be a watch position. The Reaper operators, sitting at a ground control station somewhere in the region, had been watching those figures as human beings in motion for 20 minutes before authorization came in. The engagement itself was technically clean, professionally executed, and legally authorized under the rules of engagement in place at the time. It was also the end of the lives of the people visible on that screen. The operators who fly armed MQ-9s train extensively for that psychological reality. They are not insulated from it by distance the way early commentary on drone warfare sometimes suggested. Several studies of MQ-9 operators have found that the extended dwell time before an engagement, the hours of watching a target, produces its own distinct category of operational stress. The operators who authorized and executed that shot are not machines. They went home after their shift. That is worth knowing, not because it changes the assessment of the operation, but because it is true. By ZO 420 local time, the situation board at 5th Fleet reads as follows: 1 IRGC mining boat destroyed. 2 additional IRGC fast boats destroyed on their launch ramps, ramp infrastructure cratered by A-10 Warthog strike. Coastal staging facility at the launch site assessed as non-operational. 14 mines neutralized in the inbound lane. 4 probables under active clearance by EOD team, expected full clearance by 0500. Emergency single-file transit corridor open under Carver escort. 0 U.S. casualties, 0 U.S. vessels damaged. The IRGC mine operation achieved a temporary disruption of roughly 80 minutes of normal tanker traffic, the time between the initial contact and the opening of the emergency corridor. It destroyed 1 fast boat crew and cost Tehran an operational launch facility. By the IRGC's own mission logic, that trade is catastrophic. The message was supposed to be Iran's strength and American vulnerability. The message that was actually delivered was the reverse. Here's what this operation tells us about where the Strait stands in 2026. The URG still has mines, hundreds of them, possibly thousands, in various forms. The mining doctrine has not changed. What has changed is the U.S. Navy's sensor coverage of the Strait and the pre-authorization architecture for responding. The 18-minute window between mine contact and lane reopening is not a fluke. It is the output of an exercise cycle that has been running since the early 2000s, refined after every ERG probe, calibrated specifically for this waterway. The Navy did not improvise, it executed. But here is the sober note, the one that needs saying even in a story with this outcome. One mine that the SH-60 might have missed, that the ROV might have failed to reach in a stronger current, that a tanker captain might have pushed through before the corridor was validated. And this story ends differently. A supertanker hitting a moored contact mine in the inbound lane of the Strait of Hormuz does not just sink a ship. It blocks the lane with wreckage, spills crude across the navigable channel, and could take weeks to clear. The mine threat is not defeated by destroying the boat that laid them. It is defeated mine by mine, in the water, by people in inflatable boats with remotely operated vehicles fighting a 3-knot current at 4 in the morning. That is the part of the 18-minute story that rarely makes the headline. The Hellfire and the GL-8 are the dramatic punctuation. The EOD team working contacts in the dark for the next 2 hours is the actual victory. Consider for a moment what those EOD sailors knew about the field they were working. They knew there were 14 confirmed contacts and 4 probables. They did not know, could not know with certainty in the first passes, whether the IRGC team had also placed any influence mines mixed into the pattern. Influence mines are a different category entirely. They do not require physical contact to detonate. They respond to the acoustic signature of a passing ship, or its magnetic field, or the pressure wave its hull creates in the water. A field seeded with a mix of contact mines and influence mines is a qualitatively different problem from a pure contact mine field, because the influence mines cannot be neutralized by cutting a tether and floating the device to the surface. They have to be swept with dedicated equipment, acoustic generators, degaussing cables, pressure sleds towed at the right speed to simulate the signature of a loaded tanker. The EOD team did not have full capability influence mine-sweeping gear deployed. They had what they had, a cable-guided ROV, 2 standby divers, and the SH-60 sonar overhead. If there had been a single influence mine in that field, properly set, properly armed, the emergency corridor would not have been opened at T+18 minutes. The Commodore would have been on the phone to 5th Fleet requesting an MCM ship, and the Strait would have been effectively closed until dedicated minesweepers could be positioned. The assessment that the field was contact mines only, made on the basis of the sonar returns and the visual observation from the Reaper of the deployment method, was correct. But it was also an assessment made under time pressure by people working from limited data in the dark with ships stacking up behind them. That kind of decision is made by humans, not algorithms, and the margin it worked within was thinner than the outcome suggests. Comment yes if you think the URG tries this again in the next 6 months. Comment no if you think the loss of the launch facility changes the calculus. We want to know where you land on that. What the URG learned from this morning, or what they should have learned, is that the Strait does not belong to the nation on its northern shore any more than an interstate highway belongs exclusively to the state it crosses. It is a shared artery, and the U.S. Navy has positioned itself as the circulatory system. Every attempt to clot that artery comes with a Reaper overhead and an A-10 on alert. Every time. The full clearance of the Hormuz minefield was completed at 0503 local time. Normal traffic resumed at 0511. The emergency corridor stood down. Carver resumed her transit. The SH-60 landed back aboard with 40 minutes of fuel remaining. The MQ-9 Reaper continued its orbit. In the hours that followed, the insurance market for Gulf tanker transit spiked briefly before correcting downward when the clearance confirmation came through. The oil price moved less than $2 before reversing. That reversal is, in its own way, the most complete statement of what the operation accomplished. The market looked at 18 minutes of U.S. Navy response time and decided the Strait was still open for business. If you want to understand what happens when the Hormuz scenario goes the other way, when a mine is not cleared in time, when a tanker does hit, when the closure lasts not 80 minutes but 80 days, that is a different story, and it is one worth telling. Subscribe and stay close. That one is coming.